conference room on the 42nd floor of my brother's building had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over downtown Toronto. I remember thinking, when they finally let me in, that I'd never actually been up here before. 6 years working for the family company, and I'd never once sat in that room. My brother was already seated at the head of the table. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Sit anywhere," he said, "the way you talk to a delivery person." There were 11 other people in that room. Board members, our family's accountant, two lawyers I didn't recognize. My mother sat near the window, her hands folded, her expression the particular kind of blank she wore when she'd already decided something and didn't want to discuss it. I sat down. My brother slid a single sheet of paper across the table to me. "We're restructuring," he said. "Your position is being eliminated." I looked at the paper. It was a separation agreement, 30 days notice, a severance package so small it was almost insulting. $6,200, which, in Toronto, doesn't get you through 2 months of rent. "You're firing me," I said. "Restructuring." He said it again, like the word meant something different. My mother finally looked over. "It's a business decision, sweetheart, you understand." I did understand, actually. I understood perfectly. I'd spent the last 6 years building the company's entire client services division from a two-person team into something that managed over 40 accounts worth a combined $18 million annually. I understood that I'd done it without stock options, without a partnership track, without any of the things my brother had promised me when he asked me to stay instead of taking the job in Vancouver. I understood that my name wasn't on the building, and it never would be, no matter how much of myself I put in. I signed the separation agreement right there at the table. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. My brother looked almost disappointed that I wasn't making a scene. I shook the lawyer's hands. I nodded at the board members. I hugged my mother, who stiffened slightly, and I walked back to my desk on the 31st floor, packed my things into a single cardboard box, laptop charger, a small succulent, a mug from my university that said Queens on the side, and I took the elevator down. Standing on Bay Street with that box in my arms, January wind cutting in from the lake, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. I didn't swear revenge or look up at the windows above me or anything like that. I just thought, okay, now I build mine. I need to tell you something about my brother first, because none of what comes later makes sense without it. His name is Owen. He's 9 years older than me. He inherited our father's company at 34 when our father had his first cardiac event, and for a long time, he was genuinely good at running it. Sharp instincts, good with clients. Our father spent his last years bragging about him at every family dinner in the house in Oakville, and I don't begrudge that, honestly. Owen worked hard and the company grew under him. But somewhere around the time the company hit $50 million in revenue, something shifted in him. He started making decisions based on optics rather than operations. He hired his wife's brother into a senior role the man wasn't qualified for. He restructured compensation twice in ways that benefited the partners and quietly squeezed everyone else. He started treating the company like a personal inheritance rather than a business that needed tending. I watched all of it happen and said nothing because I was still convinced that loyalty meant something in our family. When I was 27, our father pulled me aside at Christmas. He was frailer then, the medication making him tired, his hands not quite steady anymore. He sat me down in his office, the small one off the kitchen he'd always loved more than his real office, and he told me he wanted me in the company, not just employed. He wanted me on the ownership side eventually. He said Owen was brilliant but needed someone who understood people, someone who could manage the client relationships long term. He said he was going to formalize it once the new year came. He died on January 3rd. Owen had the documents by the end of the month, and none of them included anything our father had said to me in that kitchen. I don't know, even now, whether Owen knew about that conversation. I've never asked him. What I know is that I stayed anyway, because staying felt like the last thing I could do for my father. I told myself I'd earn my way to what he'd intended. For 6 years, I believed that. My apartment after the layoff was a one-bedroom near Bloor and Lansdowne, third floor of an old building, radiator heat that clanged all night, a bathroom so small you had to step sideways to reach the shower. I could afford it, barely, on the severance and my savings. My boyfriend at the time, we'd been together almost 3 years, took one look at my new circumstances and started being less available. He didn't end things dramatically. He just slowly stopped showing up, canceled plans, then stopped making them. I came home one Tuesday night to find his key on my kitchen counter with a note that said, "Only I think we need some space." I kept the key. I don't know why. What I didn't tell anyone, not my mother, not my friends, not the boyfriend who was already ghost walking out of my life, was that the severance and the savings were not all I had. 3 years earlier, I'd started something on my own. Nothing dramatic at first. I'd noticed that a specific slice of the manufacturing sector, mid-size operations in southern Ontario, companies doing between 5 and 20 million annually, were chronically underserved on the client relations side. They needed exactly the kind of infrastructure I'd built at my brother's company, but they couldn't justify the cost of building it in-house. So I started very quietly, consulting for them on weekends and evenings. I kept it carefully separate from anything that would create a conflict. I documented everything. I got an employment lawyer to review my contract twice to make sure I wasn't in breach. By the time Owen fired me, I had 7 clients. 7 companies paying me retainer agreements. The smallest was $4,000 a month. The largest was 11. I was already making more on the side than my full salary at my brother's company. I just hadn't told anyone yet. The apartment near Bloor was not a defeat. It was a decision. I needed 18 months without overhead, without performance, without the particular performance of a woman who is supposed to need something from her family. I needed to be unremarkable. I needed them to stop watching me. The radiator clanged, I made coffee, I worked. The 18 months turned into 2.5 years. By the end of it, the consulting firm had 14 clients and a staff of 4. I had incorporated properly, moved to a small office in the distillery district, and quietly, through 2 separate holding companies registered in different provinces, acquired a minority stake in a mid-sized logistics firm called Harmon Bridgewater that had been struggling since a failed expansion into the U.S. market. Harmon Bridgewater was not a random choice. It was the largest single client of my brother's company, accounting for nearly 30% of his revenue. They'd been with him for 11 years. Their CEO had golfed with my father. And when their new CFO, a woman named Dorothea who had come in to stabilize the finances, reached out to me because she'd heard about my work through a mutual contact, I understood that the timing was not accidental. We met for lunch at a spot on King Street she liked. She ordered the salmon. She told me, over the course of 90 minutes, that she was concerned about the quality of service Harmon Bridgewater was receiving from my brother's firm. Response times had slipped. Account errors had increased. And there had been, she said carefully, some questions about billing irregularities over the last 18 months. I listened. I asked 2 questions. I finished my coffee. "What kind of steak would make you comfortable," she said, "if we were to bring this in-house with the right partner?" I told her. She didn't flinch. We shook hands at the door. January again, same lake wind, and I walked back to my car thinking about my father's kitchen and the conversation that hadn't made it into any documents. The call came on a Wednesday morning in late March. My brother. I almost didn't answer. "I need to talk to you," he said. No greeting. Owen never does greetings. "Okay," I said. "In person, can you come to the office?" I drove out to Oakville that evening, to my mother's house, because that's where Owen had moved after his divorce, and where he and my mother had apparently been having a series of increasingly urgent conversations that I was not part of. My mother met me at the door. She looked the way people look when they've been crying but decided to stop and put on a face instead. She'd made tea. which meant it was serious. Owen was in the living room. He was thinner than I'd seen him in a while. He'd been under pressure, I knew. I just didn't know how much. Harmon Bridgewater is leaving us, he said before I'd even sat down. I heard something about that, I said, which was technically true. They've given us 60 days. That's 30% of our revenue, Sophie. It was the first time in years he'd said my name like I was a person he needed something from. If we don't replace that income, we'll have to restructure. Real restructuring. People will lose their jobs. I sat down. I picked up the tea my mother had put in front of me, and I held it with both hands because the room was cold. I don't know what you want me to do about that, Owen. I want you to come back, he said. We need your contacts, your relationships. You built half those accounts. You still know those people. If anyone can stabilize this, you let me go, I said. I know. Roll. $6,200, Owen, in Toronto. He didn't say anything. My mother made a small sound. I'll think about it, I said. I finished the tea. I drove home on the 401 in the dark. Windows down despite the cold because I needed to feel something that wasn't the inside of that living room. I did not go back. What I did instead was call Dorothea in the morning and confirm the timeline. Then I called my lawyer and instructed her to proceed with the next phase of the acquisition. Then I called the managing director of a mid-size firm in Hamilton that had been quietly acquiring distressed service companies and told him I was ready to move on the asset I'd flagged 6 months ago. That asset was my brother's company. Not the whole thing. Not to destroy it. That was never the point, and I need to be clear about that because people always assume revenge has to be total. It doesn't. My father built something real, and there were 43 people employed there who had done nothing wrong. What I wanted was specific. I wanted the controlling interest. I wanted to be the one making decisions. I wanted the thing my father had promised me in his kitchen to be real. It took 4 months. It was not simple. I won't pretend it was clean. There were late nights and a lot of legal fees and one conversation with a financing partner in Calgary that lasted 3 hours and covered territory I never expected. But at the end of it, through the holding company structure I'd been building for 2.5 years, I owned 38% of my brother's company. Purchased from 2 minority shareholders who had been looking for an exit for years and had been given, quietly, a very good offer. 38%, combined with Harmon Bridgewater's decision to reroute its account management through my firm, meant that when the annual shareholder meeting came in June, the numbers were not what Owen expected them to be. The meeting was held at a hotel on the lakeshore, Boardroom on the 2nd floor. I arrived early and sat near the back. Owen came in looking like a man who had been preparing for a routine meeting. He saw me. He stopped. "What are you doing here?" he said. "I'm a shareholder," I said. He looked at the folder in my hands and something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at my mother, who had not known because I had not told her, and she looked back at him with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. The chair of the board, a man named Gerald who'd known my father for 30 years, called the meeting to order. 15 minutes in, he paused over the shareholder register and looked up. "I'm seeing the filing here from," he checked the document, "Maple Concord Holdings." "That's me," I said, and stood up. The room was not large. There were perhaps 20 people in it. But when I said those words and Gerald looked at me and then looked at the percentage beside the holding company's name, the silence had a particular quality, the kind that forms when everyone in the room has just recalculated something at the same time. Owen said, "Those shares aren't." "The transfer was registered with the corporate registry in February," my lawyer said. She was sitting 2 seats down from me. She'd been sitting there quietly the whole time, which I mention only because Owen hadn't noticed her until that moment. "The documentation is in order." My brother looked at me across the room. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time since we were kids and our father was still alive and none of this had happened yet. Sophie, he said. What did you do? I invested, I said, in the family company. Isn't that what you always said we should do? I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think people expect it to be triumph, clean and cinematic, and there was something like that. I won't lie to you. There was a part of me that had been waiting a very long time for the numbers to say what they said that day. But mostly what I felt was tired. Not tired of the fight, tired of the years it had taken to get here, tired of the version of myself I'd had to perform. The unremarkable woman in the small apartment with the clanging radiator, quietly building something no one was watching. Tired of carrying my father's kitchen conversation like a secret weight. Owen left the meeting early. The board continued. I voted my shares. Gerald, to his credit, ran the rest of it as professionally as if nothing seismic had happened. And when it was over, he found me in the hall and shook my hand and said, "Your father would have wanted you here a long time ago." I had to look away for a moment after he said that. My mother called me that night. She called 3 times before I picked up. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't. Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about how to answer that for a long time. Long enough that she said my name again, softer. "Because I needed to know I could do it without anyone's permission," I said. "Not yours, not Owen's, not anyone's blessing or approval or helping hand. I needed to do it myself, and I needed it to be real when I arrived." She was quiet for a while. I heard her in the kitchen the way I always could. The specific sound of her moving through that house in Oakville that I'd grown up in. "Your father always said you were the one who understood how things actually worked," she said finally. "I know," I said. "He told me." Owen and I reached an agreement 3 months later, negotiated through lawyers, and toward the end, in one long uncomfortable conversation in a coffee shop in Mississauga that neither of us will ever discuss with anyone else. He retained his title. He retained his salary. What he lost was unilateral control. All major decisions now required board approval, and the board composition had shifted. He understood what that meant. He didn't like it, but he understood it. I wasn't looking to bury him. I want to be honest about that. The 43 employees, the clients, the work my father started, none of that deserved to burn because of what happened between 2 siblings in a conference room on the 42nd floor. But the company that my father built, the one he sat in his little kitchen and told me he wanted to give me a real piece of, that company now has my name attached to it in a way that can't be quietly papered over by a restructuring memo. The last thing I did before I left that Mississauga coffee shop was take my phone out and delete the photo I'd kept for 2.5 years, a screenshot of the separation agreement Owen had slid across the table to me. $6,200. 30 days notice. I looked at it sometimes when things were hard and I needed to remember what I was building toward. I didn't need it anymore. I walked out to my car, the June air warm off the lake for once, no wind, and I drove back downtown to my office in the Distillery District, where 4 people were waiting on a call that had nothing to do with my family at all, and I was 15 minutes late, and that was perfectly fine. I still think about that January afternoon on Bay Street, standing on the sidewalk with a cardboard box and a Queen's mug, the lake wind cutting right through my coat. If you told me then what the next 2.5 years were going to look like, I don't think I would have believed you, not because the goal seemed impossible, but because I hadn't yet understood what it would actually take to get there. Not just the work, but the kind of person you have to be willing to become while no one is paying attention. What Owen did to me was wrong. I don't dress that up. He made a promise on behalf of our father's legacy, and then he quietly erased it when it became inconvenient. That kind of thing leaves a mark. But I've learned, the hard way, sitting alone in a cold apartment listening to a radiator clank at 2 in the morning, that what you do with that mark is the only thing you actually control. I chose not to go back and argue. I chose not to send the emails I drafted and deleted. I chose to build something instead, and to build it the right way. Documented, legal, transparent, patient. That wasn't noble self-restraint. It was just the only path I could respect myself for taking. I knew that if I cut corners, if I let the anger make my decisions, I'd end up with something that felt hollow even if it looked like a win. My father was a man who believed that how you built a thing mattered as much as what you built. I didn't want to prove him wrong to honor him. The intelligence part, and I mean that plainly, not as a boast, was understanding that the situation had a logic to it. Owen's company had a structural weakness. Harmon Bridgewater was too large a single dependency. That wasn't something I created, it was something I observed patiently over years. When Dorothea called me, I wasn't lucky. I was ready because I had spent 2 years becoming someone worth calling. And the persistence, the 2.5 years of being unremarkable on purpose, of watching my savings carefully, of turning down shortcuts that would have compromised the holding structure, that part was genuinely hard. There were months when I questioned everything. When I thought maybe the apartment and the clanging radiator and the boyfriend who left his key on the counter were just what my life was now. Staying the course through that kind of quiet doubt is not glamorous. Nobody sees it. That's the point. When Gerald shook my hand in the hallway after the meeting and said my father would have wanted me there a long time ago, I didn't feel vindicated in the way I expected. I felt something quieter than that. Something more like, okay, this is what was always supposed to be true. It just took a while to get the paperwork right. I deleted that screenshot of the separation agreement on a June afternoon in Mississauga, and I didn't feel anything dramatic when it disappeared. Just the small, clean sensation of setting something down that I didn't need to carry anymore. That's the part I want to leave you with. Not the boardroom moment, not Owen's face. The moment I realized I no longer needed the evidence of what had been done to me because what I'd built had already replaced it.